The Dragonback Series by Timothy Zahn. Book 6, Dragon and Liberator. Chapter 24. The latest trip had been made, this one much shorter than the previous ones. Though there were 2 men on duty on the bridge, most of the rest of the Advocatus Diaboli's crew and passengers seemed to have retired to their staterooms for ship's night. But not Neverland, Frost, or Allison. The 3 of them were still in Neverland's office. The 2 men seemed to still have a lot of questions for Allison concerning her father, General Davy, and his work. Watching them through the ventilation grill, Tanim wondered what it would be like to die. She didn't know, but she would soon find out. The end of her time limit was rapidly approaching, when she needed to go 2-dimensional on a host's body or disappear into death. But she had no host. Jack had been taken off somewhere and hadn't returned. Langston had been refused permission to come aboard the Advocatus Diaboli to pick up some specialized tools. And Allison was with Neverland and Frost, with no sign that their conversation would be ending any time soon. Silently, Tanim backed away from the grill and set off through the Advocatus Diaboli's maze of air ducts. She didn't really have any place to go, but she couldn't bear to stay by Neverland's office any longer. She didn't want to die within sight of her host, the human girl she'd grown to know and love over the 2 short months they'd been together. The ducts were vibrant with an ever-shifting mix of aromas. The smell of human and Valaga bodies combined with a blend of cooking and engine lubricant and a dozen other scents. She sniffed at the air as she worked her way through the ducts, wondering if it all smelled richer now than it had earlier. Dracos had told her of legends that said Kada's senses grew sharper as death approached, but she couldn't tell if that was happening or not. And then suddenly, one particular aroma seemed to leap out at her from the mixture. A very individual, very familiar human scent. Harper. She frowned, looking around her. Sure enough, her aimless wanderings had brought her to the part of the ship where Harper had been locked up. With nowhere else to go, she headed for the duct that would take her to his stateroom. Reaching the junction, she turned the corner and stopped short. 5 paces ahead was the opening that led into Harper's room. Only the grill was no longer fastened the way it was supposed to be. It was instead hanging at an angle, held in place by a single corner bolt. Cautiously, Tanim moved forward. Had he been putting more items in the duct and been caught? But he was still in the room. The scent whispering past her snout and tongue showed that much. She reached the duct and eased an eye around the corner. Harper was there all right. He was lying on his side in his bed, the blanket pulled up to his shoulders, his right arm half tucked beneath his pillow. His bare right arm. It was insane, Tanim knew, completely insane. Even if Harper managed to sleep through it, he would spot her as soon as he opened his eyes. But if she waited here, she was dead. She had nothing at all to lose. Keeping her eyes on Harper, she eased around the edge of the hanging grill and dropped into the room. There was no reaction. Padding over to the bed, she gingerly touched his forearm and slid up onto his skin. It was like the first sip of cold water from a mountain-fed stream after hours of wandering through the forest with nothing but warm and stagnant tree stump water to drink. Tanim closed her eyes, feeling the tension and fear and hopelessness draining out of her as peace and strength flowed in to take its place. Yes, this would work. An hour on Harper's skin, and she could go back for another 6 hours to the ducks. Surely before those hours were up, Neverland and Frost would tire of asking their questions and send Allison off to her own room to sleep. She'd just have to make sure she was gone before Harper woke up. Easy enough to do. Readjusting herself on the man's skin, she settled down to wait. 10 minutes later, she was fast asleep. She awoke with a start, her heart thudding with the awful feeling that something was wrong. It was dark, for one thing. Darker than it had been when she'd come into Harper's room. And then, to her relief, she understood. While she'd been asleep, Harper had merely pulled the blankets all the way up over his shoulders. Carefully, stealthily, she shifted around on his skin, trying to find a place where she could see the clock by the side of the bed.
Good morning,
Harper said softly. Tanim froze. Had he been talking to her? Or was there someone else in the room? She flicked her tongue out a bit. Aside from her and Harper, the room was empty.
Come on, I know you're awake,
Harper went on in the same quiet voice.
Cat got your tongue?
With a sweep of his arm, he flung back the blankets. And to her horror, Tanim found herself looking up at his fully awake face. She reacted instantly, hurling herself backward off his skin and landing in a crouch on the deck past the end of the bed. She glanced up at the grill, preparing to leap into the opening and escape. Only the grill was no longer hanging by a single bolt. It was back in its proper place, secured at all four corners.
You must have really been tired,
Harper commented. He'd made no move to follow her, but was still lying in bed, propped up on one elbow.
You didn't even wake up when I put the grill back.
With an effort, Tanim found her voice.
What do you want?
She asked. She had hoped to sound strong and commanding as Dracos, but the words came out sounding merely weak and scared.
I want to help you,
Harper said.
Why do you think I left the back door open for you in the first place?
Tanim flicked another glance at the grill.
Was it a back door? Or was it a trap?
You've been here over 5 hours,
Harper pointed out.
If I wanted to turn you over to Neverland, I could have done so long before now.
It all seemed reasonable, Tanim had to admit, but there was still something odd about it.
Why do you care what happens to me at all?
Lots of reasons,
Harper said.
You ever hear the expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
No.
Basically, it means that if Neverland is fighting the both of us, we have some common ground to join forces against him,
Harper explained.
And against Allison, too?
Tanim asked.
You still trust Allison?
Harper countered.
She didn't betray me to Neverland,
Tanim said.
I don't know who she is anymore, but I know she's still my friend.
Good enough,
Harper said, nodding.
And by that same logic, I'm your friend too.
Tanim flicked her tongue out, wishing again that she knew how to read human emotions from the changes in their sense.
But you lied to Neverland,
she said.
How do I know you're not lying now?
I don't know how to answer that, Tanim,
Harper said, his voice low and earnest.
I can't prove anything, I'm telling you. All you have is the fact that I didn't turn you over to Neverland and Frost.
That's not very much,
Tanim said.
You could just be protecting me so that you can take me back to Braxton Universes with you and learn how to turn my abilities into a weapon, just like General Davy wants to do.
That's not what I want,
Harper assured her.
But even if I did, you'd still do better to stay with me. Mr. Braxton is a much better person to deal with than General Davy.
Tanim flicked her tail in frustration.
I don't know what to do,
she whispered.
I don't understand any of this.
I know,
Harper said sympathetically.
It's a crazy business keeping up with us humans. All you can do is hold on to the fact that Allison is still your friend, and that I'm your friend, and trust us to protect you as best we can.
Tanim looked back at the grill.
Maybe I should go and see if Allison's all right.
I wouldn't, Harper said. In fact, I'd stay away from her completely for the next few days. Neverland's going to be keeping her close from now until the refugee fleet arrives. We don't want him or any of the others spotting you.
Whereas no one's going to look at you.
Harper smiled.
Exactly, he said. Sometimes it pays to be a prisoner.
He pointed toward the small bathroom.
But you should probably go hide in the bathroom for a bit, he said. They'll be delivering my breakfast soon, and we don't want the delivery boy to see you.
Very well.
Tanim said, patting toward the door. Suddenly, she realized how long it had been since her last meal.
Is there any chance I might be able to take a little of your food?
Every chance in the galaxy,
Harper assured her.
From now on, what's mine is yours.
He smiled again.
And while we eat,
he added,
perhaps you can tell me more about yourself and about Jack and Allison and Dracos.
The next 3 days went by slowly for Tanim. Slowly, but in some ways far too fast. She spent a fair amount of her time roaming the Advocatus Diaboli's ventilation ducts, keeping an eye on Allison and watching Neverland and Frost at their various activities. For much of that time, watching the latter two meant crouching in the bridge air duct. Tanim couldn't tell what exactly was happening with the attack force, but they seemed to be moving their various ships in strange ways. Harper, when she brought back the news of these events, concluded that they were doing something he called maneuvers. Those were practice sessions, he told her, to make sure all the ship's crews knew what they were supposed to do when the refugee fleet arrived. He was eager to learn the details of the maneuvers, and Tanim tried her best. But many of the words Neverland and Frost used were ones she didn't know, and because of that were difficult to memorize. She could only remember bits and pieces, not nearly enough for Harper to put together into a clear picture. She could tell he was frustrated by her fumbled words and half-remembered phrases, but he never complained, nor did he criticize Tanim for her shortcomings. Tanim was grateful for that. She was grateful to him for many other things, too. She still missed Allison, missed her terribly, in fact. But though Harper was a different sort of friend, at the end of those 3 days, Tanim knew that he really was a friend. Like Jack and Dracos, she was slowly coming to realize, friends came in different forms. Oddly, though, in many ways, Harper reminded Tanim more of Allison than he did of either Jack or Dracos. She wasn't sure why. She was still pondering the puzzle when their friendship came to its end.